Hi, welcome to the Last Roll of the Week podcast with Red Dice Diaries. This is John.
Hello.
And I'm Hannah, and we're going to talk about pubs versus monsters.
And we'll get to that after the music. Okay, so Hannah, pubs versus monsters. This was a topic you said you wanted to talk about, so why don't you lay it out for us? What do you mean by pubs versus monsters?
Well, it started out with, we watched two movies in the space of about a week that were surprisingly similar in their setup, while so very, very different.
Okay.
The first one was Sinners.
Yeah.
Which is quite popular at the moment, so I don't want to talk about it too much. And the second one was a movie called Slay, which I found on Tubi. The premise is both of these films is there's a special night going on in a pub and then some vampires appear. And it got me thinking about how many other films there are that have a very similar setup. Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah. Grabbers.
There's loads of movies where you have this idea, and it struck me that it's a really good idea for a one-shot for an RPG. You've got an interesting building that you can make effectively the same way that you would make a dungeon. You've got a cast of characters ready set, be they the locals, the newcomers, or the monsters. You've got this isolated location, so it's a nice little bubble that you can control, and you've got a good idea what's going to go on in there as a GM. But also, it's quite cliched in that way that means that players can really get into it for a one-shot.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, most of these films, they're sort of like a siege scenario, aren't they? You know, where you're sort of trying to barricade yourself in the pub and the vampires or whatnot are coming at you.
Yeah, something like The Feast as well, although I think that's like a diner or a hotel rather than a pub. You've got this one isolated building, you've got some people in there, there's whatever politics going on between those people at the time, and then here come the monsters. What do you do now?
Yeah, I was thinking it's quite an interesting idea for an RPG session, because obviously normally, like you say, the tavern in a stereotypical D&D game is a very sort of cliched setting, and we've done episodes about this in the past, whereas sort of reframing it as the sort of the fortress, for want of a better word, you know, that you're having to defend against these waves of vampires, tentacle Cthulhuid beasts, whatever they might be. It's quite an interesting way of taking something that's very familiar, so like you say, the players can get into it sort of straight away, because everyone knows like what the crack is with a stereotypical D&D tavern, but then sort of twisting it so it becomes not just a case of like, oh, we're going to shack up in the tavern, the bard's chatting with the barmaid, the sort of the warriors are drinking in the corner, the wizard's like chatting with some of his shady contacts or whatever. And you can have it start off that way, almost like lulling them into a sort of false sense of security. And then things start to happen. I suppose my question would be to you in this sort of case, and if you were doing it as an RPG setting, obviously we know that in the movies, the reasons they stay in the pub, aside from the monsters around them, is because that's the plot of the film.
It's because they paid for that location and they're damn well going to use it.
Exactly. Whereas I suppose the thing I would ask is, in an RPG setting, how do you stop the player characters as soon as they realise, like, oh, the pub's starting to get surrounded? How do you stop them from sort of bugging out the back door and being like, peace?
Well, you don't necessarily have to, because that can be an interesting story in itself. But the way I would go about it would be by saying there's some people that you're not going to be able to move that quickly. Maybe there's some old people or some little kids or a heavily pregnant character. Somebody who your player group will want to protect, and therefore they're going to stay there to protect them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably works great. And I know you tend to run sort of like heroic sort of games, you know, and obviously if you like goody heroes, then you probably would stop to help old Mrs. Miggins or whatever.
If you've got a more black hat game, then maybe there's something else there that the player characters want. What's that one that's like snakes in a western? They're all hanging around because they want the money. you know? Maybe your group's just finished a heist or something, and there's a big treasure chest that needs divvying up, and they're not going to want to split up or leave that behind.
Well, I mean, I was going to suggest as well, another thing you could do is you could just make it clear to them that, like, flee, depending on if they're really surrounded, that fleeing's not an option. Let's say the party have a much-loved henchman with him. Maybe he's like, as soon as they start getting attacked, he's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here! And he runs out the door. They see him get, like, 15 paces. Something swoops and grabs him, like Phantom style, and he's gone.
Well, yeah, there's... Obviously, how isolated is isolated when you've got magical teleport spells. It depends on your game setting, but there's nothing to stop there being some runes over the pub door that prevent the teleport spells from working, or whatever else you want to put in place. As long as you tell the players about it before they try to use their teleport spells, they know it's a thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I would feel a bit gypped if I was playing a wizard and I'm like, oh, I've made it to like the level where I've got like teleport, let's go. Then suddenly and I went to go to a tavern and the GM's like, oh, by the way, don't forget them runes above the door that stop magic working. I'd be like, come on, have a word, it's got bells on it. I'm going to go and drink in a different pub that doesn't have runes over the door that stop my magic. Just because if I've like survived umpteen levels to get teleport, I want to teleport around places and like use them. So I think personally I'd feel quite gypped if like I couldn't use them essentially just because it's inconvenient for the plot. But I think the other thing you suggest where you're like, oh, there's stuff that can't be teleported in the inn, so you can then sort of make a meaningful choice to the wizard where you're like, okay, yeah, you're right, you can teleport away and you will be fine. However, those priceless magical artifacts you've been gathering at the inn, you can't teleport out with all of them. Oh, your friends are there, you can't... Maybe your old wizard master who can't teleport, you can't teleport out without him. Do you want to go? And you can do, I'm not going to stop you, but you'll be leaving all this stuff behind and you're making that decision.
It's also how isolated are we and how well does your teleport work? Because if it's only taking you 100 metres, well, that's about where the line of monsters is. Are you sure you want to do that?
Again, though, my issue with that would be like, I would, as a player, I would like, oh, that's convenient. I can teleport 100 metres, and the line of monsters just happens to extend up to 100 metres.
It would depend so much on the game system that you're running and the exact circumstances. I mean, if this was a Star Trek game, then it'd just be some wishy-washy talk about isolinear.
Yeah, but oh, there's magnesite in the atmosphere or something, whatever.
Yeah, to prevent you from using the transport.
I think that all works well in a game where you expect that. Like if you're playing a Star Trek game and someone says, "Oh, you've beamed down to an away mission," and you're like, "Oh, well, why don't we just beam up again when there's danger?" And they're like, "Oh, there's atmospheric interference," or a Klingon bird of prey's attacked, the transporters are down. I'd be like, obviously that's an excuse to keep me on the planet, but I expect that because it's a Star Trek game. Whereas if I was in like a sort of decent D&D game, I wouldn't expect there to be some like wishy-washy sort of techno-babble explanation why I suddenly couldn't use my teleport, or rather I'd react more negatively to it because it's not a convention of the game. Where it's a bit like, you know, if you play a Call of Cthulhu game and your character goes mad during it, you don't mind that, you expect that, it's a Call of Cthulhu game. Whereas if I was playing a normal D&D game and I was a wizard and I just picked up a book and I instantly went mad, I'd be like, what's going on with that? Because it's not part of the conventions.
Okay, your teleport works for 100 miles. There's nothing around here for 100 miles, though.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what you really need to do, and we've sort of touched on this already, in my opinion, is rather than sort of stopping people doing what they can do, because let's face it, it's never fun to earn capabilities or skills or spells or whatever and then suddenly be told you can't use them because it's inconvenient. Rather than sort of tamping down on those, incentivize that there's like something you need to do or something you need to get or something you need to protect in that tavern.
Well, similarly, letting people get out can be very useful to your story.
Yeah.
Because then they've got to get back in if they want to help the people that are still there, or get the gold that's still there, or whatever the thing is. And the Slay movie, I thought, handled that quite well.
Yeah.
Where they had, very early on, the guy who was bringing the food supplies to the pub got killed by the vampires. And then the people in the pub had a big argument, one of them left and came across this food supply van, which happened to have some garlic in it.
Yeah.
You know? Things like that, it's worth doing.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing you could potentially do, let's take our example of the teleporting wizard, is you could say to them, like, okay, maybe they're going to teleport to get help. They're going to get to the nearest village. But you sort of make it clear, like, oh, they've only realistically got a chance of holding out in the tavern for X amount of time. Then it becomes a race again, or you have some sort of clock ticking down as they're sort of gradually, like, the inn's demolished. And it then becomes a race against time with them trying to hold off for as long as possible and the wizard trying to get to the next village and get help as soon as possible. And you could, if you're sort of comfortable with it as a GM, you could sort of jump between the two. And then, you know, you've got the guy who's playing the wizard being like, oh crap, I've got to get to this village quickly. Like, oh, well, when he last jumped over to, like, my friends back at the inn, they're like really struggling. I haven't got long. And you could sort of play it off to make it sort of very tense. So I almost think, in a way, if you know the capabilities of your players, which you really should do, you know, you've probably got copies of the character sheets if you're the GM, rather than sort of trying to restrict stuff they've got, you should almost try and work them into the scenario.
Yeah, that is a better way to deal with it, but again, you do mostly need to look at what your player characters are capable of doing, and sometimes even remind them that they're capable of things if you think there's something there that they could do that's kind of cool. Like, if your cleric's entirely forgotten that he's got that spell that means he can make a cross glow with sunlight, that might be a little problem for the player group until he does remember it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And obviously we're all aware, as we say all the time, like, you know, the stuff going on in the game, it's not as life or death to the players as it is to the player characters. And there might have been a week, 2 weeks, even longer between a couple of sessions, so it's very easy to forget stuff.
Or in a one-shot, as I'm suggesting, you're not necessarily going to be familiar with the game and how it runs, so it's worth pointing out to people when they've got funky powers.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that's pubs versus vampires.
Nice.
And some thoughts thereon. Love to hear any of our listeners talking about any scenarios that they've run that are similar, how it worked out, how they set up for it.
Yeah, if you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can do so via SpeakPipe. There'll be a link in the description of this episode. We'll perhaps feature your voicemail in a future episode and maybe even respond to it. Like Hannah said, we'd love to hear what you've got to say on this subject. Maybe you didn't use vampires. Maybe you went for something else. How did it work out? Let us know. We'd love to hear about it. So until we see you next time, have fun, stay safe, and whenever you're playing, enjoy yourself.
Now let's head to the Winchester and wait for it all to blow over.
How's that for a piece of deep fried gold? Yeah, boy!